Okay, now that you know about dependent and independent variables and how to collect data, now we need to know how are we going to display that data for others. So this is your Graphing 101 tutorial. Please feel free to re-watch this video anytime you need to, and feel free to use this stuff in your other courses where you need to be doing some graphing. So let's start off with why graphs? Why do scientists love graphs? Why do we use graphs for almost everything we do? It's because when you're collecting data, you have tons and tons of numbers. So instead of having to stare at a page full of numbers, we can compact those numbers down into a visual, easy to see representation. So now we can quickly see patterns and move on. So there are lots of different types of graphs. There are 3 that we are going to focus on for this course. And now I'm going to tell you the proper way to use those graphs. We'll start with a bar graph. You want to use bar graphs anytime that the data you're collecting is in categories. So for example, what kinds of pets are popular at Beaufort High? What you're asking people is going to be a category. You're not getting a bunch of random numbers. Okay, you're grouping them: cats, dogs, birds, etc. You can notice in the bar graph in the corner here how those categories work. Next, we have line graphs. These are used when you're comparing your 2 variables. Anytime that you have time as a variable, you will most likely be doing a line graph, and your time will be on your x-axis, which is across the bottom. Okay? Next, we have the pie graph or the pie chart. This is used to show percentages of a whole. Always percentages, okay? A pie graph or a pie chart is always used to show the percentage out of 100%. For example, how do Beaufort High students get to school? We can show this in a pie graph, okay? So the percentage out of the entire student population, okay? All right, so what are the important parts of a graph and how can you do them the right way? Start with the title. Your title needs to be direct and it needs to be to the point, but it needs to be specific to the question that you are asking. I need to know exactly what those data points are in your graph just by reading the title. So here is an important never, 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 okay? Never title your graph, graph. Okay, that's a no-no. I'm looking at the picture. I know it's a graph. We don't want to call it a graph, okay? You also never want to just call it the question. So in my previous example, we said, how do Beaufort High School students get to school? That's not going to be the title of our graph, okay? We want to be more specific without actually asking the question in our title. The axes titles, first off, you want to rotate them when you are making them on the computer. People like to have them staying across from left to right. But your y-axis, the one that goes up and down, you need to rotate that title. And I'm going to show you how to do that in just a moment. You also want to just very simply tell what was measured. So appropriate axes titles might be length, time, count, population. Okay, these are 1, maybe 2 words, exactly what you measured. And you always want to include your units. Okay, if you measured time, how did you measure it? Did you measure it in seconds, minutes, hours, days? If you measured length, how did you measure it? Centimeters, meters, kilometers? We need to know that. That's really important to the people who are looking at your graphs. Spacing. You want your graph to be pretty. You want to space out the data, give it lots of room so that it's easier to read. You don't want to clump it up and make it really tiny, so spread it out, okay? All right, so let's get into how do I actually do this? How do I make a graph? So I'm going to show you how to make a graph using your Google Drive, since a lot of teachers here use the Google Drive applications. So once you get logged in, you want to click on this blue New button and then click on Google Sheets. This is going to open a program very similar to Excel. A good practice to have is to always have step number 1 be to title what you're working on. This is a good everyday practice. Do something specific so that it's easy to find if you ever need it again. I can't tell you how many students are like, I did the assignment, but I can't find it. And after we go through and open a bunch of untitled things, we find their work. So it will just be a lot easier for you if you just get into that practice, get into that habit of always naming something. Okay, so we're going to start off by doing some bar graph data. So remember that bar graphs are categorical. So let's say we went around school and interviewed people who worked there and students to see what types of animals they had. All right, let's say we got some cat owners and lots of dog owners. And I'm just making up this data as I go, so this is not real. Okay, there we go. That's plenty of data. All right, so once you have your data inputted, you want to click and drag to highlight your data. Then you want to come up to your toolbar and you want to click on Insert, scroll down to Chart. Okay, once this opens up, you'll see all the different options. But since we want to do a bar graph, it is already chosen for us. So what we want to do is come over here to Customization and click. Okay, and so we want to title it. Remember, our titles need to be specific and to the point and not be a question. So what did I measure? I measured pet types. And specific to my interview was in Beaufort High. So these are pet types of people in Beaufort High. Okay, what I measured and specific to me in this study. Okay, click out of there and it shows up for us. Now we want to scroll down. Here, a legend is not appropriate. Legends are only appropriate when you have multiple sets of data in the same graph. We do not, so we want to tell this to go away. Okay, continue to scroll down. Here we have our axis. Right now this says the horizontal, that's your x-axis. So along the x-axis we had our categories of pets, so we're going to say types of pets. Now this is not a measurement, this is categorical groups. So we do not need to put any units here. Okay? Click out of that box and you'll see it show up on our graph for us. Come up next to axis where it says horizontal and click this drop down menu. And you have left vertical. This is so that you can name your y-axis. Okay? Our y-axis was a count of how many people had that animal. And since it is a count, counts are specific. So we do not need to have units there either. Okay, we want to click Insert. And now we can move it around as we please. Okay, so you just did a bar graph. Let's just scroll down and see how to make a line graph. So once again, we're going to insert our data. Let's say that I measured some bacteria over time. I'm going to measure them every 5 minutes for a while. Again, I'm just making this data up as I go. So let's say I started with one little bacteria, and I'm going to see what happened to it over time. Okay. All right, so there's my data. Once it's inputted, we're going to start out the same way. Click and drag to highlight all of your data. Come up to Insert, down to Chart. Okay. Now this is where The Google Sheets is a little funky, so we're going to need to tell it to do some stuff for us. First, we're measuring over time, so we need a line graph. Notice, for some odd reason, it has created 2 lines. I don't know why Google Sheets does this, but this is easy to fix. So what you need to do is come to Chart Types and click the little box here that says Aggregate Column A. By doing that, it's telling the program, I want column A to be my x-axis, okay? And now we have our 1 line, and it is growing as it should be if we check our data. So we can double check to make sure that it's looking right, okay? So then again, we want to go to customization again. We want to title it. So what did I measure? I measured bacterial growth. And now something specific to my research in agar. Let's say I grew it in agar, which is simply something to grow cells in that provides it with all the nutrients that it needs, okay? So what did I measure, and what is special about how I measured it, okay? Once again, there's only 1 set of data, so a legend is not appropriate. We're going to get rid of that. I'm going to scroll down to our axis. I'm going to label our horizontal or x-axis. That's time. How did I measure the time? I measured it in minutes. So there's my unit. Okay. Now let's do this drop down again to our y-axis. My y-axis was population. How did I measure it? It was a count. Okay. Now if I had measured population in millions, that's what I would put as my unit. Okay, so we're good to go. We're going to click insert. And once again, we can move this as we see fit. You can also copy and paste these into Word documents or anything else as needed, okay? All right, so there's your basic how to make a graph using these programs. Please feel free to watch this in the future anytime that you need to make a graph so that you can get your full credit points as you work on these. Also, feel free to watch these if you need to make graphs in other classes so that you can get your points there as well. Thanks.